We're now on the edge of the Season 1 conclusion. Most of these story arcs are arriving at their final climax, and we even begin a fourth arc with the Ardoni clans. Hey everyone, David here, Director of Songs of War, and welcome to the Episode 9 Behind the Scenes video. This was an episode that involved a lot of water. Anyone who's worked with 3D stuff knows how difficult water can be. First we have the oceans. I had to get the waves just right, because I didn't want the water being kind of flat. Well, completely flat, honestly, like our other animations have been up till this point. So I did a lot of VFX tests on this. I even created some animated wave foam textures inside After Effects, exported them as image sequences, and I brought them in and tried to use them kind of like decals in Blender. Unfortunately, as good as the effect looked, it was running into so many problems with the image sequences. I ended up just cutting these to save time and using the material itself to try to kind of fake some of the kind of wave foam. With the waves being added, I then had to get the boats and the buoys just right, so you'll notice them all sort of bobbing over the waves. The Songs of War builders built a lot of awesome boats, and I picked a small group for this fleet. I then realized that they looked kind of weird sliding through the water all alone, so I spent quite a long time designing these boat trails. Although you can barely see them in the final scene, it was just one of those effects that looked great in the test scenes, and it just didn't really translate into the execution. It looks really good from top down. Unfortunately, none of my shots were top down. Then after all that, I wanted to show some dolphins riding the wake of the ship, somewhat since dolphins are my favorite animal, but also I thought it was a nice little detail, just to make it feel a little more alive. And then the dolphins jumping led to me needing to create some splashes, rather than just the kind of Minecraft bubbles, which I usually use, which didn't really look great, but I was still experimenting. All this ocean stuff, however, became useful when I started doing the Walls of Time scene. I was able to adapt the ocean, but give it a much colder and frozen look, as well as add small floating chunks of ice, which I hand animated to bob up and down over every single wave. I hope someone appreciated those little icy boys. Also, this episode was the Guardian scene, which I could use some of these effects on. I had to design a few more splash effects, though, that were more like the kind of water surface being disturbed. It felt weird seeing the water just kind of totally flat when things were coming in and out of the surface. Anyway, going back to the earlier scene at Mahoa Docks, this was a group build. I don't think any one person took this as their primary project, although Mac ended up calling it Duke Duke Docks, and thus the Duke Duke tribe began. What's surprising here is just how massive an area we were able to bring into Blender. You can see the entirety of the docks, the surrounding wilderness, and all the way across the forest into Flora. Yes, there is literally the entire Flora set being rendered in the same scene as the docks. Oh, and why don't we just throw an entire island in there as well? Add some tree extensions, and we've got one of the largest sets in Season 1. You gotta take a moment to really appreciate Blender for being able to just run all this smoothly, and Blender's free. I think the scene is one of the best developing moments between the characters in the Felden arc. Both Lucan and Nika kind of open up to each other finally, as well as we now see Kyoshi revealing a bit about himself and who he is as a leader. We next get to the Ardoni burial sequence. We saw this previously in the prologue just a little bit, but didn't go too much into it. When I started writing the burial sequence for this scene, something just seemed off about it. It felt too human, so I talked with my co-director Sam, and we came up with some different burial customs per species. For the Ardoni, we went with something actually pretty similar to human. The only major difference are the stones. Rather than writing words on the stones, the clan masters would light them up with the markings of the dead. We thought this was a nice way to kind of identify which person was killed, as well as having burial seem a little more fantasy with the lights. The glowing lights illuminating all the night kind of just looked good. When I first made the design for the stone, however, someone pointed out that it looked like an actual Ardoni with its head and limbs kind of chopped off, and unfortunately we just couldn't unsee this, so we redesigned it to be a little more of a kind of thin stone plate and added rocks around the base to show it was a rock. We did have some other interesting designs as well. Then we get to the rave scene. The Ardoni Council scene. This is the first time seeing all the clans together, and it's the first time meeting Ardoni from outside the Sandaris clan. The main purpose of this scene was to explain why the clans have been hesitant to get involved in things. They barely could wrangle up a small team. We also learn that Thalius didn't just hide the Mobilium Prime, but also all the Prime songs from the other 3 clans. Thalius having hidden the other Prime songs was something that was supposed to have happened between episodes 1 and 2, which is why I think a lot of people were confused in the beginning of episode 2 when Thalius shows up in Sandari and he's just kind of chill after having just lost Hawken. The idea was that episode 2 was actually a while after episode 1, and he had already been, going to the other clans and hiding the other songs. I added some Northern Lights fairly last minute. I figured since they're quite far north, actually the farthest north that they've been since episode 1, right along the border of Northwind, that it'd make kind of sense to see these lights off in the north. They were a bit tricky to make and ended up being a bit of a rendering nightmare, but I think they look pretty cool in the end. For lighting the interior of the council, I initially had a lot of light coming in through the holes in the ceiling, or the side openings like I usually do for the Ardoni scenes. I ended up actually pulling back further and further with the lights until there was almost no light in the room anymore other than just enough to illuminate the faces. I thought this was kind of interesting look, seeing all the bright Ardoni colors glowing in a really dark room. Also fit the kind of darker mood. All the Ardoni in the background who don't talk are almost completely unlit, just making their markings shine. We also introduced a new song, the Donut Trail song. Honestly, I need to come up with some better names for these songs. During production, I've been calling the songs things like Donut Trail song, Shockwave song, Energy Ball song, or Jumpy Boy song. We did write a few more official names down on the song's war wiki. However, the placeholder names are the ones that will forever be canon to me. Anyway, Donut Trail song is Zulius' song, and it's an Aggressium one, which are always fun to design for me. I have a lot of other Aggressium effects to pull from. I went back to some of my very early particle experiments I made ages ago when Tiger Stripe and I were first doing some kind of VFX research prior to starting animation for Songs of War. The donut one was very unique looking and worked as a good projectile without feeling anything like Tigrins, which was good because we wanted to keep Tigrins looking unique and identifiable. We call it the Donut Trail song because the main element is that it's emitting a whole bunch of donuts, actually. Donut-like geometry, which change size over their lifetime, which give it the kind of illusion that it's this one longer single blob. Then I layered a handful of random other elements, such as kind of red electricity stuff and particles, to really complete that Aggressium look. Back to the Guardians. I thought it'd be cool to get at least one underwater scene in Songs of War. I know in classic Minecraft, Guardians are kind of hostile, but in this universe, I thought they'd be a little more like an ancient protecting kind of species, as their name might imply. Lighting an underwater set is completely different than anything else. There were a lot of elements that went into it. I created this unique shadow texture on the water's surface in order to get the bright light shimmering on the ground like you see in pools and stuff. I had to also throw some nice rays coming through the surface to create the kind of backdrops for some of the shots. The real trick was making the water material look good from below. By default, looking up from below at our water plane material stuff really looks pretty bad, so I did a lot of material node work to get something that looked better from below. The aquatic update came out during production of Songs of War at some point early on, which was just at the right time, because the scene that took place here, I wasn't really feeling. Initially, Igneous and Sen were going to arrive around this area and get attacked by some undead mobs coming out at night. Nothing to do with the necromancers, just actual undead. I forgot exactly why, but I really wasn't feeling the scene and the way it was written, so then I just kind of replaced that entire scene with this thing. Designing the Guardian beams. In Minecraft, the beam, it just kind of like stabs you. It's like touches you, pokes you. But here I wanted to kind of have the beam wrap around and pull a person, more like it was doing some actual telekinesis. The idea that the Guardians floated this big bridge up at the end didn't seem too far-fetched, given their telekinetic powers. Initially, the script did call for the bridge kind of like being suspended up above the water, but that just seemed a bit excessive. Seeing the blocks in the water I think also made more sense. One story arc we did resolve a bit earlier was Abigail's. Episode 10 was just a bit too packed with so much resolution that we decided to spread things out just a bit. I think it also creates a bit more surprise when suddenly all this stuff goes down with her story and it's not even the finale. Jalkar's downfall. This is a tricky subject. At the beginning of the story, he was kind of a fun, likable bad guy with just a bad temper, but over the course of the season we see more and more reason why he's really not someone you should be rooting for. He's been progressively more and more harsh on Grimm, eventually ditching him. In desperation, he attacks Igneous and Sen. He would have killed Igneous if he wasn't a Magnerite, and tries to steal their horse. He doesn't have a redemption storyline. Instead, he just drops lower and lower, losing all restraints, and kills Sam in the process. I think it's this point that he becomes unredeemable. It was always the plan from the beginning that Sam wouldn't make it to Season 2. I'm talking about my wolf, not the co-director. To be perfectly honest, one of the main reasons we felt he needed to die was just because of where Abigail's story was going in Season 2. The wolf was also extremely difficult to animate, having 4 legs and a lot of facial features and all these different controls. I had considered an ending where Sam returned back home earlier in the story, like maybe around the point where Darlene turned around. She was going to say, oh, take Sam back to my house for me or something. But it just didn't make sense for Abigail to leave Sam early on. And also I thought it was, having Sam's death really helps sell the anger Abigail feels when she finally kills Jalkar, as well as it gives Abigail some consequence to her actions. I didn't want a story where Abigail just goes off, kills the bad guys, and saves the day. She was naive about the world and learned kind of the harsh reality that Mr. Finch was trying to protect her from. Previously, we've seen Abigail spare her enemies. Lucidius wasn't really a threat to her, so she let him live. Grimm, despite attacking her, was already left behind from Jalkar and disarmed. She spared him too, but here I feel like she finally snapped and had a big change in character. She's becoming a bit darker as she's being exposed to the real world, beyond her sheltered life in Underwood. The actual death of Jalkar went through a few designs. Initially, my plan was for her to actually cut his head off. I even had this designed in layout. The idea was that you kind of saw Abigail as this kind of bit more restrained and gentle in the series, and here she just goes full force, dodges his attack, and surprise, straight for the head. It seemed a nice brutal way to kill Jalkar. However, the biggest reason we didn't go for it wasn't because it was actually too graphic or anything, but because we couldn't make it look good without making it look super graphic. It really needed like gore and blood or something, otherwise it was just a big cube popping off the body, and it almost looked comedic. So my co-director and I met again, as we always do when I run into these situations, and decided it'd make more sense for her to just kill him with a bow, especially considering she already had her bow out, and there's no reason for her to just charge him with a sword. This also added a really cool moment where you almost kind of expect another duel as Jalkar pulls his blade out and turns around, and then suddenly is hit in the chest with an arrow. After Infinity did this awesome thing with the music where it just cuts out sharply. Going with the bow kill also worked nicely because there's a shot that parallels when she had Grimm at bow point, and with Grimm she lowered her weapon, whereas here she finishes him off. What's weird to me now is how Jalkar became more likable during production. On paper, he was supposed to be a pretty scummy and dislikable character. His character bio literally has almost entirely negative character traits, but with Quinn's voice acting, his animation, his dynamic with Grimm, he became a kind of lovable, dislikable character. I think it's good, though, that we're seeing Abigail finally undergo a bit of a dark change. She lost really the one true friend she had, her wolf Sam, and now she's a bit broken. When she's holding the egg, she doesn't even seem to smile. She just wonders if it was all worth it. Thanks everyone for watching. As a reminder, there are just a few days remaining to pledge to our Patreon if you want your name in the Songs of War Episode 10 credits. Literally, for just $1 pledge, you can have your name in the Season 1 finale. As a small note, you'll probably want to actually pledge before Wednesday, because on Wednesday we'll be putting all the names into the credits and rendering out the episode. So that's all for now. See you next time after the season finale.